It's a beautiful recipe. I've been making this minestrone soup for, I reckon, a good 15 years or more. And it's something that I make every year, usually around this time and usually around winter, sort of autumn, winter when it starts to cool down. So I look forward to teaching you this today, but it's a really simple dish and it's the classic, I'm teaching you the classic minestrone recipe today because I feel that once you start with the classic, you can obviously then add all the other little bits and pieces to it as well. So I might start cooking and then if anyone else joins, they can join us. But I just want to say thank you for joining today and for following along. And I'm going to turn my heat on and then I'll talk you through some of the ingredients. For this recipe, you actually don't need a really large saucepan unless you're doubling the recipe. So I've got probably about a 20 centimetre pan here. And I'm just going to heat that up a little bit. But the actual minestrone recipe in itself dates back to probably the 2nd century BC, where the Romans conquered the Italians. And what they did was when they came, they introduced to the Italians assortment of new foods. And one of them was actually the minestrone soup. And the minestrone soup for Italians is probably more popular than, say, a pizza or a pasta. So for us on the outside looking into Italy, you'll probably think that pizza and pasta is the most popular sort of dish, but it's actually not. When you actually go into the houses of the Italians and sit with them, they tend to have a minestrone soup going even through some of the hotter periods. They'll have a minestrone soup as well. So I'm going to start by putting some really good olive oil in a pan and around about a quarter of a cup. We actually use quite a bit of oil because there's not too many ingredients in this dish. And I like to use cobram. It's one of my favorite olive oils. And to that, we're going to add a brown onion. So I'm actually going to fry that now. Put the gas down a little bit. And is that really loud? Pretty good. Okay. I hope you're well, Louise. I'm gonna sweat down the onions a little bit. The trick is to not burn the onions, the carrot, and the celery at this point. This is like the most important part of the recipe. I'm gonna put the gas down a bit, and we'll fry that off until it's nice and soft. And then what I've got here is I've chopped up some carrots, just a couple of small to medium carrots and some pieces of celery. I actually use the middle part of the celery. I really like using that for soups. And I use some of the leaves of the celery as well because I think it adds a nice dimension of flavour. So I'm just going to fry this off until it's nice and soft. And then I'm going to add my carrot and my celery. And at this point, I'm going to actually add a little bit of salt to it as well, just to extract some of the flavours. I can also do a little bit of cracked pepper at this point. And I'm just going to mix that through. Looking a little bit dry for me, so I'm just going to add a bit more olive oil. If you don't want to use so much olive oil, you can just add some water as well. Now at this point, I'm actually going to put just the heat up a little bit, and I'm actually going to put the lid on the pot because I want the steam to come through and cook the celery and the carrots really nicely. And the thing about this point and this part of the recipe is if you really sweat it down nicely, it takes about 10 minutes to do it properly. So we'll kind of speed up the process a little bit today, but you really do need to cook this down for a good 10 minutes until it kind of starts to caramelize just a little bit, because that's where all the flavour comes from. So the base of this recipe is really important. If you're going to add meat at this stage, and we're not doing a meat-based one today, but if you really did want to add a little bit of chuck steak or some ossobuco, or you could even put a little bit of mincemeat if you want to add some protein, or maybe some chicken, you would add the protein at this stage and fry it down with the carrots and the celery and the onion. I actually like it without meat, but if you do want to add more protein, this would be the time to put your protein in. Choose a meat, though, that doesn't take so long to cook down. So an ossobuco, to be honest, takes about an hour and a half to really cook down nicely and be nice and luscious in the mouth. So choose a piece of meat that, you know, something like a chicken thigh or some mincemeat with a bit of fat going through it, so it's tender as soon as you cook it through. So this is actually sweating down quite nicely now, and it's softening quite well. I'll just show you what it looks like. And to be honest, I would keep this going for quite some time, but we'll quicken up the process. I'll just keep frying it off for just a little while longer. Does anyone have any questions at this point? All good? So my secret ingredient for today, and I'm going to add another one as well, and I keep them in a snap lock bag, either in the fridge or in the freezer, is some cheese rind. And obviously I recommend Italian cheese. Like a tasty cheese wouldn't cut it for this soup. So you would have to get like a rind of Parmesan or pecorino cheese with the pepper going through it. But this is what it looks like. And it's actually the rind with the wax on it. And it's not going to kill you. However, if you just want to add cheese without the wax, you could literally add just a chunk of Italian cheese and throw it in. But this actually gives it the most delicious flavour through the soup, and it just adds this really nice depth. And because this soup is a quicker version, these pieces of cheese will turn it into something that tastes like it's been cooking for a good hour and a half, 2 hours. So if you go to the supermarket or your deli, when you ask for some cheese or Parmesan cheese or whatever, make sure you've got the rind. And I save these and put them in the freezer. So, I mean, we use a lot of Italian cheese at home, but if I'm just making a bolognese sauce and I've got Parmesan, I would actually save the rind and throw it in the freezer. And then I would use them for these types of soups. So you basically just put the rinds in the soup like that, and it'll boil through really nicely. You'll find that it'll either melt through towards the end of the cooking process. If it hasn't melted, you can pull them out. They're still really good to eat. But if it's melted through, that's fine, because you can actually just eat it through the soup, and it's actually quite delicious. So pop that in and give it a bit of a stir. And then at this point, I'm literally going to be adding, it's pretty like, oh, probably shouldn't have done that. It's pretty watery at this point. So just going to turn that on. There we go. All right. So we're just going to boil that now on a simmer. And it takes about, it takes a good 20 to 30 minutes at this point to cook. And you want the flavours to really develop and enhance. I'd be happy to add some cracked pepper to this at this point. So this is now on a simmer. So it's just simmering really nicely. And this soup would taste quite raw at this point. And you've really got to give it about probably 30 to 45 minutes for it to really develop in its flavour. So I'm going to throw some saffron in. Okay, cool. That would add a really nice flavour. And it's just a little example of whatever you've got in your fridge that you want to get rid of, whether it's zucchini, kale, leftover, I don't know, some cabbage, even Chinese cabbage, you could put it in at this point. So you could add the vegetables that you like into this soup. And, or if you had some leftover meat that you'd had the night before, or if you made a whole batch of bolognese sauce and you put a piece of pork rind in there and some chicken, and they were nice and soft, you could throw it in this soup now, and it will add a really nice flavour. And that's the whole idea of minestrone soup. It really is actually back in the olden days, and what they do today is they make soup out of the leftovers, and they would basically combine everything together. And it's usually nice and thick. That's pretty much the base soup before we even put the pasta in. So I'm actually going to add the pasta in now. I'm going to break all the rules today, but as you would know, this would take a good probably 30 minutes. If I was to taste this now, and I will, I'll tell you what it tastes like. I mean, all the veggies would be cooked at this point. And I can actually taste the Parmesan going through it already. It's like the best bit. It's like the most Moorish thing, and people will go, "Oh, what's that flavour?" And this is the ingredient that you don't tell them that's in there. But at this point, this is when you add a bit of pasta. So you could have it like this in a mug, sitting by a nice fire, but you would have to cook it down to make sure it doesn't have that raw tomato flavour to it. But it actually tastes quite good now, and it doesn't need salt. So I've already salted the vegetables. It's got the salt from the Parmesan rind, and it doesn't need any salt at this point. So I've got 100 grams of pasta, and this will actually now thicken the soup, and it will turn it into a soup. If you didn't want to put pasta in it, so these are little tiny ditalini, they're called. You can get the Barilla version, but they're just little noodles. But you could add whatever you want. You could have rice. You could add, you know, the little tiny spaghetti pastas that you used to give the kids when they were born. You could do that as well. You could add whatever you want, or you could even add dried bread, but that would be over the top of the soup, like croutons. And you would probably pop that in at the last minute before serving. So you could make a whole bunch of croutons and put them on the top. And then I would boil this now for probably, if the packet said to cook for 8 minutes, I would cook it for 6, and then allow it to finish off the cooking process as the soup was cooling down, so it didn't become too stodgy. But this amount of pasta will give you still some of the soup broth. So it won't be like a risotto type style where it's completely pasta based. It would still have a broth going through it. And that is pretty much how to make the soup. It's as simple as that. My cheese is actually melting through, which is delicious. And that's now going to probably take another 10 minutes. And then it's done. I can keep this in the fridge for a good 5 days. Otherwise, I would be happy, and I would make this. It's really nice to make on a Sunday, actually, because if you don't have it Sunday night for dinner, then you've got a mug to have during the week or to take to work or school. This soup freezes really well. And it freezes really well with the pasta cooked through, so you could reheat it at the same time. So, and that's the soup. So it's thickening up really well. I'm just scraping the bottom because I can feel the cheese and the pasta sticking to the bottom of the pan. So you do have to keep an eye on it at this point, and I've got it on quite a slow simmer now, but that's almost ready. It's almost ready to go. Actually, what we put on top is just as important as the cheese rind, because the soup's so simple. What we do on the top of it really adds to the whole soup, so we can put that together. But I will show you how we're going to plate up, because it's really good. There's a couple of ways I do this. So my husband's side of the family, his sister-in-law, she's vegan. So this is actually a vegan soup without the cheese rind. So if I was going to make it for them, I wouldn't put the cheese in it, but everything else is kind of vegan, which is nice. And we make this soup when we're having like a fire pit outside in the backyard, and I put it on the bench and I'll make a pumpkin soup and we'll fill up mugs and everyone's happy with that. But this soup's really nice for that. But if you're just having it, like I would have this for my lunch. So what I would do is I would get a plate, obviously. You could do a mug though. And I would pop some in a bowl. Like so. And remember, this needs to probably cook another, well, you kind of knew the gist that I was hurrying things up. So what I would do now with that plate is I would chop some continental parsley, not the curly parsley, the flat leaf parsley, and I would sprinkle that on top. And then I would get some of the grated pecorino cheese or the, sort of Parmesan cheese, and I would actually put some of that cheese grated on top. So grate the same cheese that you put in the soup. That would be nice. And then I'd get some cracked pepper. And then I would finish it off with olive oil over the top of that as well. So I'd just put a sprinkling of olive oil. And that combination is so simple, but it's just delicious. Like, it absolutely works. And that is the minestrone soup.